Would you be happy to read something?
Yeah, of course. Hold on. I actually did a reading last night. I did a reading that had karaoke after it. So you like do a
fun.
reading and then do a song. So
What song did you do?
I did Dynamite by BTS.
Oh, World Cup. We're just following the World Cup.
I know. I had actually like already registered that was the song I wanted to do.
That song is really high though. That must have been hard.
Yeah, I think there's video of it somewhere. It was extremely hard. That's why I'm taking it quite easy with my voice today. But it was, like no pain, no gain. Like you have to suffer for your art. Is it okay if I just do like a page? Like
perfect.
Yeah, nice. This is just a reading from about 100 pages into the novel. These two characters are kind of going on dates and getting to know each other. They met the following Monday at a historic riverside pub near the city-ish part of the city, 2 overground stops from his work and a long rental e-bike ride from hers. It was a cold evening and she was wearing a hat that had maybe been a mistake, a sort of tam. He was drinking a stout and she a G&T. They were sitting outside in the early darkness, smoking his cigarettes. The smoking area was by the waterfront, offering views of the skyline accessed along the river. Lights of towers and bridges reflecting across the water's dark surface. She pictured a sunken cathedral. From this close up, the river had a noise-cancelling effect, absorbed all the usual city sounds. The background silence gave their voices a strange resonance as they talked about their days. Throughout their conversation, Chuck's direct gaze made Joey feel weirdly self-aware. All she could think about was whether to take her hat off. After he'd finished his stout, he asked her, "Are you any good at darts?" "No," she said. "Are you?" "Kind of," he said. "There's a dartboard inside. Would you like to play?" She took a sip of her drink and looked at him over the rim of her glass. "I don't usually play games where the likelihood is I'll lose." "Okay," he said, nodding. "But where's the fun in that?"
That was lovely to hear you read it.
Thank you. Cheers. And I don't have to sing a song afterwards.
I'm not going to make you sing Dynamite. We spoke a lot about that kind of recognition and relatability in your writing, but I relate so deeply to the hat. I think there's nothing kinder you can do to a person when they're clearly wearing something that is them pushing themselves a little bit than give them a compliment. It's just...
Yeah,
I've got a really big sun hat and I wore it recently and was really feeling like I would regret it. And this man on the tube was like, "Great hat."
Oh, it means the world. Yeah. That's great.
Tell me a little bit about writing romance. Was that important to you to write romance that did feel like part of a big love story, even though you knew probably these characters weren't going to end up together? Because I think that's important.
It was really important to me that like for at least the first half of this book, there's like an unironic... I mean, I say unironic. I mean, there's plenty of irony in the way they talk to each other, but like, I think that's like the thing that really made me believe in this book was it's like the kind of friction between the two characters is like, I don't know, I think that's something we look for in our relationships, and like the way they speak to each other and they kind of get something from each other that I don't think, there's this kind of transactional element where like he's this kind of older guy who has a stable life. She doesn't have a stable life. She's this younger woman who kind of is exciting in her own way and is kind of like new to things, and that's quite intoxicating for him. So you can kind of boil it down to that formula. But I think there's something kind of like inexplicable. People have called this like a situationship novel, which isn't a word that I use in the novel, but I'm fine with people applying that to it. And I think people are really down on those for a lot of reasons, but I try not to be too pessimistic about that stuff, just because I think although those relationships can often end painfully with one person feeling like they've got the short end of the stick, like fundamentally it is two people spontaneously finding each other and being interested in each other, and that is kind of part of the optimism of the book, even though it's undone somewhat by the ways these kind of like relationships turn, and very often they can't sustain, and that's very difficult. There is this kind of like weird redemptive quality, and like that sensation where like you meet someone for the first time who you do just have a real connection with. That is kind of like one of the high points of lived experience, really. Like that's kind of like one of the always incredible things about staying alive, is that you do meet these people who you just form these sudden connections with. So I tried to be actually quite like reverent about that, and like not, I certainly wasn't trying to like belittle or make fun of those experiences. I think, as I say, like very often those relationships that run very hot at first tend not to be able to sustain, and that's sad. But I did want to give this kind of like quite clear-eyed view of that without kind of like falling into like easy cynicism or kind of like feeling like I had any kind of like contempt for the characters or for their situation. Like I unironically love that people find each other and kind of like have relationships. It's a, you know, really beautiful thing. But then you also have to inject some reality into that. And the reality is that life is hard, and, you know, like any kind of relationship is going to require sacrifice. And before too long, like the demands of your real life are going to creep in. And odds are that a relationship won't be able to sustain that, which means the ones that do sustain that are really special. That is the kind of like really sincere heart of the book. I think if I had just written a book that was kind of like eye-rolling-y, like kind of making fun of like the idea of that would be insufferable, and I would really regret doing that. But I think one of the things I'm really proud of with this book is that like even when things are at their worst, like the moments of connection where they're like, and part of it hurts a lot more as well, because it's someone who really sees you and kind of knows what you're about, and they're telling you that you've like fucked up or something like that, or that like you have disappointed them, and it hurts so much more than if it's someone who you've known for much longer will say that to you. Like sometimes that can really just kind of like pierce you. That's what I really wanted to write about, that kind of like the kind of sharpness that can come with that kind of convergence of people.
Yeah, I think all relationships change you in lots of ways. When you care about someone, you end up absorbing a lot more maybe than we always think, whether you end up together or not. And these are two people that, although they don't end up together in the relationship, it's very formative for both of them. And like you say, like human connection, I mean, it's one of the greatest things in life. It forms who we are. And I think so much of the writing of that is so brilliant. You kind of were saying earlier about maybe having a fear at the beginning about writing a young woman, but really a lot of I related to a lot of having relationships with older people, and especially like some of the quippy things she would say on the date of like, oh, I tend not to play things that I'm going to lose at. I really related to that. Like things I felt I had to say to be cool and to be older on a date with somebody, having a guy make me watch loads of Adam Curtis documentaries and then finding it cute when I got upset by them. But so much of that is the tension between these characters, but also how they're learning and absorbing the books that they like and the poems that they like, and exchanging lots of little how was your day and how are you, and also the fact that they have a very rich creative relationship that has enabled them both to go off in, you know, kind of their lives in different ways.
Yeah.
And that's really special as well. Yeah,
for sure.
That's quite rare to find that. Do you share writing with romantic partners?
My girlfriend is a writer as well, so that really helps.
Does that help, or does that make it harder?
I'm trying to think of a way in which it could make it harder. No, it really, I mean, she's pretty much my first reader for everything. Like I'm always kind of like asking her really annoying questions. That's nice. Maybe this is like this is quite late in the interview, but like I'm pretty high maintenance in terms of being a writer, in terms of like I spend a lot of my time on it, and I'm very, very sensitive about it, and I kind of can't be any other way. Like I'm kind of too far in now to try and learn to protect myself a bit. So like
next time I feel bad about being sensitive, I'm also going to be like, look, I'm too far in, I can't change. Okay.
but I just mean like, what I mean, this is the kind of thing that I think about a lot actually, is that like, there are like huge flaws with that, and it makes your life very difficult. But equally, like, you want your writers to be insanely sensitive, or else how are they going? That's kind of part of the job description, is like you need to be like incredibly alert to like very minor changes in yourself, or in kind of like the tone of a conversation or the way people interact. There is a kind of sacrifice you make to that, where it's like, if you make that your focus, and if that's what you spend a lot of your time thinking about, it does kind of like heighten your sensitivity in your own life, I believe.
How do you think that like helps you in your relationship, also both being two very sensitive people? Because I think sensitivity is something that we often view in maybe a slightly negative way of like, oh, don't be so sensitive. But I actually think it's a real superpower, especially in relationships, because it makes you very attuned.
I think so. Yeah, I think it really helps you connect as well. And obviously, like, yeah, being able to talk to the person I live with about writing is just like really useful because it's what I spend most of my time thinking about. I do kind of view it as like a kind of pick your poison thing. Like, I probably could not care so much about my writing and like focus on other stuff, but then my writing wouldn't be as good. You know, I push myself like quite hard. I think that's like, yeah, like great work requires like a huge amount of attention to achieve. I'm not saying I've got there, but like that's kind of what my aim is. It just requires a lot of sacrifices, and you kind of need to be with someone who understands those. But I think in terms of what Chuck and Joey share as well, is it's like, I was thinking about this, like I wouldn't have, there are quite a lot of books about writers, and I think, to be fair, a lot of readers are interested in reading about writers because there's like obviously they're kind of like two halves of the same, it's like two halves of the relationship, reader and writer. But also, like, a lot of readers, I think, tend to be literary fiction readers, like either have done some writing themselves or are just generally interested. Part of the reason why I kind of gave myself a pass writing about two writers in this book is that they're both incredibly outside, and like they have not had any success. It's not like they've got like books or anything like that. So what I mean by that is I hope that it's very relatable for people who have kind of like perhaps dabbled or even just thought about it, which I think a lot, again, people who read literary fiction have the idea has entered their heads. Again, one of the kind of like unironic, really nice things about the characters is that they do kind of, at least for this kind of like first section of the novel, like actually care about what each other says. And I think that's a really big thing, is it's like, that doesn't always happen, like in, forming a real connection where people really listen to each other. And I think that's one of the nicest things that Chuck and Joey share, for sure, is like they kind of hope for the best for each other's work. When they actually encounter the work, then their like reactions start to set in, and that kind of complicates some things.
It's incredibly intimate to share work with people and to be seen in that way. I think because it feels like you're kind of in someone's dream world before some things. It's different when it's in a book. But I'm in like a writing workshop group of people, and I never kind of take for granted how special that feels. And also I think of romantic relationships where we've email exchange coming back in fashion, I hope, because like emailing someone a poem you've read, so lovely. I went to a literary like reading night the other day, and people were doing readings from books, but a woman it was a reading on the theme. What was the theme? I can't even remember. But she got up and read a love letter that somebody had written her. And I was just like bowled over by it. It was amazing.
That's
I'm not sure that anyone's ever written me a love letter, but I think she had it, and it was pretty fantastic.
You got to get other Jem to work on that.
Well, this has actually been really helpful because we talk a lot about how to give good feedback, because I'm very sensitive, and he's going to have to, he edits this podcast, so he's going to be listening like, well, I guess it's actually pretty good that she's really sensitive. Jem, can I ask you about one more thing, which I forgot to ask you about earlier, which was, I'm really interested in people quitting social media. I feel like we're all talking about it all the time and it's difficult, but I also think that in terms of things that we're in control of in our life, and as they relate to like reward systems and lots of the things that we're in control of, tell me about your decision to do that and what you feel you got back from it.
I had social media until, I think it was like about when I was getting my first short stories published. I just kind of like made kind of like a mathematical decision where I was like, okay, I have to work a day job, I have to read, I have to spend time with my friends. The rest of that time I need to be writing. And I was just like, using social media was just like a huge time suck for me. Like I was living in East London and working in Chelsea, like at a copywriting place there. And that's like a good like hour and 10-minute overground ride, something like that. And I would just be like scrolling and kind of like not thinking my own thoughts. And it was at that point, so maybe that, I want to say that was like 2019, something like that. But I was just like, I honestly can't do this anymore. Again, it is just a thing of sacrifice. It's like there are things, it would be ridiculous to say like there aren't opportunities I haven't missed by not having social media. Like I'm sure there are, but equally, I don't know. Yeah, like I've written 2 books, and like a lot of that is time. You know, if that's like an hour, I'm not even trying to say that's some kind of like flex, but it's like, but it is to myself, because it's like ultimately like if I had an hour less free time a day, or like 45 minutes less free time a day, that's 45 minutes, like, you know, like that compounds over time. Also, one thing I will say is that if there are like any aspiring writers, I understand it's quite an extreme measure, so and people do what they think they should do. I think at the very least it's good to like set some hard boundaries with the way you use social media. But one thing I would say is like, if there are writers out there who are like worried about the exposure their writing will get if they don't have social media, my personal experience has been the opposite. I think people are probably more interested in what you have to say if it's a bit harder to find. That does not say like you have to be a complete ghost. In fact, that's not to say that at all, because there are people who have like leveraged careers like in line with building an audience. But all I'm trying to say is that there's not just one way of doing things. There's, really apologize if I don't pronounce the name right, but Liadan Chuinn, who wrote an Irish writer who wrote a short story collection last year that was like incredibly widely read and really well received and had some really great stories in it. No one knows who they are. I think they know like roughly how old this person is, but there's no picture. There's like very, very little known about them, and like their stories were really widely read. So all I'm trying to say is like, if you're listening to this and you're a writer, don't fall into a trap of like getting too worried about that, because I think ultimately people who work in publishing don't really view that as a huge plus or a huge negative. If you have like a marginal presence online, it's not. Ultimately the work is the work, and that's what comes first.
And you're going to have more time to do the work, which I think is important. And also then you have a team of people to help you, and it's their job to help find you media opportunities and do things like that. You don't need an Instagram account to do it. I've been working really hard on Instagram recently to help promote my book, and one thing that I've noticed is I'm therefore like spending more time on it, engaging with every comment people leave. And when I've now been sitting down to write, staring at a page but I don't have the attention span anymore, and like I'm going to need to start making some like choices and some sacrifices to do that, because at the end of the day the writing's the thing that I want to do. And it's very easy to trick yourself into being like, oh, but the social media will allow me to continue to do that. That's not true. It's just a lazy excuse that we all give ourselves.
But I think one thing you've said is that is true, is that it's like it is changeable, and like you will get the attention back. I think people sometimes fret that they've done this like irreversible damage to their brains, and it's like ultimately like if you just spend like a week off it, you'll be pretty much back. So it's not, it's not something I miss massively. And obviously it does really help having like friends who will keep me in the loop of like what's up. Also, one more thing I'll say as well, because some people have pointed this out, is that like there is like a fair amount of social media in my book. What's really surprising is how little social media has changed. People are kind of saying the same things. The takes are pretty much the same. The events that are happening are pretty much the same. And the platforms are pretty much the same. Until there's like a huge shift in the technology where it's all like injected into your iris and you experience it that way, I don't really foresee any huge... So it's also like what people think they're missing is also not that big of a deal. I don't think. That's just my personal thought on it.
Yeah, no, I really agree. And also I think it's really important to have those stories of people making hard choices. I've listened a lot to Zadie Smith talking about not having a phone, and it makes me happy how just, I think, kind of generally pathetic she finds it that people rely on them when everyone's like, but how do you not have a phone? And she's like, I can't believe you're asking me that. It's all about choices. And I think it's really good every now and then to have a little bit of like a shame or push to be like, no, it actually is on me to like start making some different decisions.
I really agree with you. I agree with that.
Well, it's been fantastic to talk. Thanks so much.
It's such a pleasure. Really, really cool.